I do want to start with thank yous. So thank you, Abby and Gundy, for allowing me to exhibit in your beautiful space, which is just so conducive to showing art. And I've been doing it for quite a while now. And the first show that I was ever in, Abby asked me to be in a climbing show, climbing themed show. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. And I wrapped up my then 16-year-old son was my model. And I wrapped him in saran wrap and packing tape and put him on a wall. And then she asked me to do a solo show. And I think that was in 2011. So I think that was in 2013 that I did that show. And I've been exhibiting ever since. So really, thank you so much. And on that note, too, in making this show, it's really taken a village. And so, first of all, I want to thank my husband, who's always my support for everything that I do and has been for years, but also really helps me finding little bits of metal and old rusty junky things that just wind up being the perfect bases for these sculptures. So he's always helping with that. And another person who's helped a lot with that is Laszlo Palos, who's not here, but he's a local artist who's also a welder. And he has also been instrumental in providing little tidbits for me to work with. Then another person is Tom Kimmel, who's a local photographer and also a woodworker. And he helped create these pieces along with my husband. These are actually pieces of cottonwood tree that we found on a hike over near Garden of the Gods. We found this huge log that we just thought was the coolest looking thing ever. So we had to find a way to bring it home and then cut it up. And anyway, these are all pieces of cottonwood from that tree that I could not have possibly shaped on my own. My cousin Deborah, who lives in New York now, but was a local, she helped me finish all these bases because I was behind the 8-ball as I usually am before a show. So she helped me with that. And also my cousin Brian. Now, speaking of AI, I think it would be hard to reproduce these sculptures with AI. I don't know, but I do have to admit that each one of these figures here, which is how all the sculptures start, has a little 3D printed skeleton inside. So I used to make my own skeletons out of aluminum wire and mesh, aluminum mesh. But then I thought, why don't I see if I could do a 3D printed skeleton? It might save me a whole hell of a lot of time and be a lot more exact. So he printed them, and they come to me in kind of this very stiff posture, and I got to take them apart and then put them all back together again to get them to do what I want them to do. But having those bony landmarks, the hip bones and the rib cage and collarbones and all that stuff it's really helpful because these postures aren't static at all. So when you turn the body, when it's doing something besides this, it's quite complicated actually. And those bony landmarks really help me. So I'm going to thank my cousin Brian for helping me with all of those 3D skeletons. Let's see, anyone I'm leaving out, Chris? So it takes a village. And especially, thanking Abby and Gundy also because as part of my process, I've had this idea for this show for, I don't know, 2 years. But 2024 was a really tough year in terms of personal injury and also a studio fire that really set me back. And I always think that I'm going to pull off a show in plenty of time. I'm planning it all. I've got it all figured out. I know exactly what I'm doing. But then the work tells me something else. It's like the work goes, that's not good enough, or that's not what you want to do, or try this over here. Ooh, that's going to be fun. So the work kind of takes over, and I have to respond to that. But as a result, my poor gallerists deal with a little bit of last minute stuff from me. So I also thank them for that. That said, just let me find out who's read the artist statement. Okay, so not a lot of you. The artist statement in this show, I don't usually think of my artist statements as being so vitally important, but in this show, I really think it is. So I'll just fill you in a little bit, those who haven't read it. I spend a lot of my time. I'm a very, I keep track of what's going on in the world. Uh, because I'm in my studio all day long, I listen to NPR. Some people might think that's crazy, but I don't want the other shoe to drop without me knowing about it, at least a little in advance. But also, it's just being social activism and social conscience has always been really important to me. My mother, who's in the front row here, raised me going to demonstrations in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. So thank you, Mom. Was always a civil rights activist and a political activist. And so that's very, very much a part of what I think about all the time. And so although my work doesn't necessarily initially look like it has a root or a basis in that consciousness, it's vitally important to me. I can't imagine being engaged with a body of work that did not respond to my social and political and personal conscience. So in the case of this show, a couple of things. One, when our boys were little, they're both full-on adults now, but when our boys were little, we had boys and we had superhero movies in our lives. And I tried going to these superhero movies with my family because, wanting to be like, okay, I can be a part of the gang. And I just hated them. It's like all the shoot 'em up bang bang seemed so incidental. People getting blown up to smithereens and all these minions being wasted by these few people who came out as these superheroes. I was just like, how is this entertaining? This is disgusting. I don't find it entertaining at all. I find it upsetting and I find it unconscionable. And the fact that it gets the acceptance that it gets just irks the shit out of me. So that was part of it. And the Guardians of the Galaxy, I started thinking, well, what does it take to be a real Guardian of the Galaxy? Certainly not like stabbing somebody or shooting somebody with a bolt of lightning. So that was part of the motivation, as I was really thinking about what the real Guardians of the Galaxy, what they would have to have, and who are they? And then the other part of it is that, I've been really aware of what's going on with the status of women in the world. Even since, Roe v. Wade in 73, I was alive before all that started. And now we're back, we're going so far back. And I listen all day long to what's going on, not just in our own country, but in the world with regards to the status of women. And it's just unbelievable to me what's happening. And it's terrifying. And it's upsetting because I know that if there are guardians, they're probably women. And I don't know a whole lot of guys that would object to that, actually. The qualities that it takes to hold a community together are often the qualities that are invested in women and what women provide in terms of the glue and the consciousness and the connective tissue that holds actual communities together. And one of the quotes that I used is by Elif Shafak, who wrote a book called There Are Rivers in the Sky. And she said, it's easy to wage war. It's keeping the peace that's difficult. So yeah, I really think that's, a really large part of like, we're not giving credit where credit is due. And a lot of, I'm a very optimistic person, unabashedly optimistic. I'm being tried right now with the politics. It's terrifying. But, I read a book when I was 13, Joan Baez's Daybreak. And Joan Baez, if you don't know, is not just a folk singer, but also an incredible political activist and inspired me from an early age on, one, to sing, and also with her activism. And she wrote a book called Daybreak, and in it, she describes pacifism. And I was just blown away by this as a young person. And she describes this one scene where, there's all these people mucking around in the mess and the dirt and the blood and the mud, and they're all banging each other over their heads and just trying to survive inside of this space of total chaos and violence. And they poke their head up, and there's this group of people over there that are like building this structure in the open air with room and space and light. And they look over there and they say, that'll never work. And they just dive back down into the muck. And I feel like that's kind of how I feel about the Guardians and the choices that we have now. It's like there's nothing necessarily to point in our favor that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. It doesn't necessarily feel that way right now. But if we don't get our heads out of the muck and try something different, it's like little kids learning how to walk. They fall all the time. It's like I feel like we need to do that as a society. And as an artist, you know, sometimes I feel like being an artist is just totally self-indulgent. I mean, I love making my work. I can't stop making my work. The physical pleasure of making work is so vital to my existence. But I also feel like if I can't lend that authenticity, my authenticity as an artist, to that which I believe in, it doesn't mean that much to me. So it always evolves for me from an idea that has to do with something I'm thinking about that is meaningful to me as a person in terms of my values. And this show certainly comes from that for me. This is a real work of the heart for me. So that's what I've got to say so far. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. So as I was thinking about the Guardians, I was thinking about, okay, Guardians have superpowers and they also have outfits. So that's the whole generation of this show. That's the genesis of this show is superpowers and what they would wear. Because those things are really important, right? And I also will say that, in terms of cultural history, costuming is vitally important for all kinds of things. People put down fashion, they put down whatever, but we've been defining ourselves through costume and presentation, especially as women, I would say, forever. So not gonna discount that one. But these guys are sort of my 5 major categories, and I could have chosen anything. I mean, there's so many qualities that I find to be like superheroes that I didn't use. But in this case, this one's passion, and this one is loyalty, and this one is rage, and that one is love, and this one is creativity. And those were the kind of major categories that I felt drawn to. And then each one of these I made 3 castings from, because I don't know if you know how my work is made, and I can explain all that. But each one of these basically served as a model from which to cast all of these dresses. So each dress, there's 3 for each form, and the titles of all of these forms relate in some way to, kind of my major arcana, or like the sort of overarching categories that I found to be essential for Guardians of the Galaxy. So for instance, rage, and a lot of people question rage. They're like, what's rage doing in there? But I feel like rage is critical, especially for women. And I know for myself, as someone who, lived in big cities and has experienced violence, that I wouldn't probably be here if it weren't for rage. I think rage has saved my life. So I will never discount that. I think it can veer over into some pretty destructive stuff. But for me, rage is essential as a characteristic of guardianship. So rage spawned ferocity and resilience and purpose. And then loyalty, and this is actually from a story called the Ballad of Tam Lin and Janet, which is a Scottish folk tale about someone who hangs on as transformation changes her lover into all kind of awful creatures, but she knows to hang on because that will transform eventually back into the man that she loves. And that sort of, for me, was like what's going on in our country, to look at all of the horrible transformations that are taking place. If we can hang tight to that which we love, maybe we can hold it until it transforms into something that we love again. So that's where loyalty comes from. And that one spawned tenacity and generosity and, can't remember the name of this one. um, patience. So that's all of these up here have names, have characters out here that relate to them like that. Does that answer your question, Chris? Okay. Ooh, that's a good one. So all of these fabrics basically are from thrift stores. In one case, the case of devotion back there, that's actually the fabric that my mother used for making my wedding dress 31 years ago. So that's a silk matelassé that I have some fabric left over from. So that one's called devotion. um, but all the other fabrics here, I would say all of them come from thrift stores. So I love going to thrift stores. My husband and I both do. Everything I own is thrifted. I'm really committed to that whole idea for two reasons. One, it's what I can afford. Two, I just think it's a great sensibility and you can find some really cool stuff. So, so all of these are scarves. Most of them are scarves. And in some case, there's like some blouse or something like that that I found. But mostly they're scarves from thrift stores. And each fabric, in order to work with the medium that I work with, so I have a model. These are my models. And before I finish them with the color and it's actually paper on the surface, which is what makes that kind of veiny, marbly effect. It's actually paper. Before I finish them, I cast all the dresses. So I'll actually wrap the pieces in saran wrap because the medium that I work with, which is called Paverpol, and it's like a fabric stiffening glue, it doesn't stick to plastic. So I'll get the model, I'll wrap it with the saran wrap, then I'll dip the fabric in the glue, and I wind up with this, you know what fabric's like when it's wet? It's like nothing, right? But I have to make it so that it looks expansive and flowing, you know? So I put the fabric on the model, but then I have all these exterior armatures that I use to kind of hold things out, or I turn something upside down so it billows and I let it dry for a little while. And so that's how all that's done, but it has to be natural fabrics. So this one's cotton. I think that one is silk. That one's silk. That's silk. That one's a bark cloth like this skirt. It's a really heavy cotton that kind of was popular in the 1950s. That one's silk. That one back there, the blue one, is actually wool. And so is the green one on the coral. That's actually wool also. And fabrics behave really, really differently. And in some ways, you know, like that one back there, Devotion, with the white silk matelassé, that was the easiest fabric to work with that I think I've ever used. I mean, it was so user friendly. And in a way, I'm glad I didn't start with that because I would have thought it was easy. Whereas that one back there, Tenacity, which is the wall mounted piece, that's made out of a kind of silk that's really crisp. So it's very stiff and dry and thin. And that tends to crack when I try and pull it off the figure. And so that's really hard to work with. It's one reason why that one's named Tenacity, is because I was like, I'm gonna throw this thing away. It's like, this is not worth it, you know, but it you know, it wound up coming out great. But each fabric has its own characteristics and it's really, really different to work with. So it's that. Again, part of it depends on, you know, in this case, the posture and then the characteristic. Now, some of them were really specifically cast for the superpower that they embody. Some of them were a little bit more, I made them and then I was like, what does that look like? So I kind of work both ways. And sometimes I get an idea like, you know, where there's transparency, like with that blue one in the back, I knew I needed something to be really spacious. With that green one back there that was cast on this figure, this has such a great twist to it that I really wanted this idea of like a swirl. And then the notion of generosity, because it's such a generous amount of fabric and the way it kind of flows out, you know, is sort of where that one came from. This one here, I had the idea to really capitalize on that twist by starting with, the scarf was only about that wide, and I literally wound it around, which meant that I had to put saran wrap in between all the places where it overlapped, because if I don't get saran wrap in there, it'll like tear apart. It just, that glue is unforgivable. So that was really tricky, but I really wanted to do it. Like I had to try that, which is again one reason why I say the work tells me, it's like, oh yeah, you don't have hours to spend on this, but you're gonna. So that they all behave really differently. Like this silk one here, that's a super flexible, very sheer silk that actually had to be braced. I actually had to put bracing inside of it in order for it not to just completely sag. So I never quite know engineering-wise what I'm going to be dealing with. But speaking of engineering, one of the things about the wall-mounted pieces is I thought, well, if you have a wall-mounted sculpture but you want a different view, so I made them so they all turn. So that was like quite an engineering feat. I'm not an engineer, but I really enjoyed, the challenge of making that so whomever it is that winds up with it can enjoy a different view every now and then. Whereas the pedestal mounted ones, you can kind of just move around. So, oh, Ross, good question. There's maybe not a word except that maybe authenticity. I mean, I read these titles. I sent them to one of our sons who lives in San Diego, and I sent him just the titles of all the pieces. And just reading the titles of all these superpowers just made me cry. It was just so beautiful. It gave me such a sense of hope. And so, vulnerability, definitely. I mean, I feel like my work is always that for me. Practice, practice. I mean, I'm a person whose life revolves around practice, both in my art practice and my singing, in my yoga. I'm just, practice, devotion are kind of underlie everything I do. So, and I guess this show for me feels the most evolved of the work I've done so far, like the most cohesive and kind of most the work of my heart. Oh, that's the tricky part. That's the part that gives me like, it's like I have to sort of psych myself up before I do that because it's a crapshoot. I mean, I've done it enough now that I kind of know what to expect. But like for instance, with that piece over there, the black and blue one, which I'll tell a little story about that too in a minute. But that's made out of rayon, and it's very thick. And just prying that piece, prying the fabric off, I'll actually almost cut my hands. It's so sharp. But even if it cracks, and it did crack in a couple places, I can fix it because I can put a little patch on it. But it's hard. It's really hard, and I gotta kind of get in there, and I can use heat on there. I have like a little heat wand, and I can heat it up, and that'll soften it so that I can pry it off and kind of break the bond that the glue has even to the plastic. It kind of breaks that apart, and then I can pry it off, and then I kind of put it back on so that it dries in that shape. But then the second time I peel it off, it doesn't have that bond. But a lot of times, the beauty of the medium is that it allows me to portray motion. I think part of my major passion is obviously the body, but the body in motion. And so the medium itself kind of wants to stay in motion. And if you put it in a hot car, it'll dissolve, like literally, it'll just sink. So don't do that. Anyone who bought a piece, never put it in a hot car. But it's very challenging. And I've learned over the years how to brace them in the case of this one, or how to mount them so that I'm mounting it through several layers of fabric so that I'm not mounting it in a really thin spot that can morph. And actually engineering these things has just been a tremendous challenge over the years. But I feel happy with how they've come out. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned the Scottish story.
Yes.
Are there specific stories that go in the other?
They're not, except for this one kind of started everything, because this one is actually related to the black and blue piece that I was just going to talk about. And that one actually was the sort of start of all of it, because I saw a dance performance by Ormayo, and they had a flamenco, like a flamenco dance inspired piece. And this woman had this black dress with this blue ruffles underneath. And she was, doing all the really dramatic, postures and everything of flamenco. And I was just like, oh my God, I have to make that piece. And so that sculpture, really to me captured kind of that just dramatic kind of passion that I associate with the flamenco dance. And so that was the first one that I made. And then I looked for mythology because I thought once I found that one story, it was actually told in our Unitarian church. This guy told a version of the tale of Tamlin and Janet that was just fabulous. And I thought I would find mythology for all of them. But the problem was, as I looked for mythology, I found, that most goddesses have been subsumed into gods, or the women have been used as trade. They get raped, they get used by their fathers or men. And I was like, oh God, I don't need any more of that. So I sort of created my own cast of characters because I couldn't, really find what I needed, at least not as readily as I needed it. If I really did some major digging, I could probably find more. But that's the only one that really retained the inspiration of the tale that I heard. Yeah, I think always as an artist, I've tended to work both in life-size scale or miniature. And I think the work you're referring to is the packing tape castings that you've seen. I've done a lot of work with actual people as models that I've wrapped in saran wrap and then packing tape and then cut them out and put them back together, and have done some really large installations that way. I've got an installation up right now, a permanent installation at the hospital in Interquest I-25 that's like a beautiful, huge wall with figures climbing it that are the life size. Um, a couple things. I love doing site-specific installation, but it's hard to find the opportunity to do that, and it's really hard to support that because it's rare to get money for that. I mean, I've been paid for some installations, certainly the one at the hospital, but then you have to deal with it. It's like you're left with all these huge pieces, and that's difficult to deal with. And I think that I sort of wanted to do something that I could control more, like that it would just be mine and it wouldn't depend on necessarily a big place to have to put it. Um, and then I also loved working in miniature because I love the way a miniature sculpture sort of shapes the space around it. So if you have a miniature and you stand back from it, it's essentially using that little tiny form to kind of sculpt all the space around it. So I love the power of the miniature that way, and how you have to get up close and personal to see the intimate details. But if you apprehend it from a distance, you get this kind of effect of sculpting the environment. But with this one, I really felt like I wanted more real estate to work with. So I didn't want to do another set of really miniatures. In the past, I haven't really necessarily liked what I would call a middle space. This feels like a middle space to me. But in actually thinking about what I wanted to do, I was like, I want to get more detailed and more specific with all of these dresses and also with the figures themselves. Because doing like these hands and stuff, I mean, that takes forever. But doing them even smaller is even harder, So I really wanted to explore what I could create um, by using this kind of, larger than the miniatures, but smaller than the life size, to kind of see what I could work out. And I didn't know how it was going to act in terms of the materials because, like I said, I've had trouble in the past with bracing things such that they don't continue to want to morph. So I had to kind of deal with that. But actually by using, making them bigger, and using more fabric, it actually worked out really well in terms of that engineering. And then, these are pieces. The other thing I think about is, it's very rare that someone could take home one of those life-size figures and put it in their living room. You'd have to have like this huge house to do that. And so part of it too was that it's if I'm going to do a show in a gallery that's a gallery where things are for sale, I wanted for people to be able to take them home. And so that was another part of my motivation. And I've really enjoyed this size a lot. So thanks for that question. And I think when I create a show, like about 3 weeks before it's done, I'm like, God, I wish I could start the show now because I've learned so much making it. I would really be able to do a good job now. That never happens, right? It's part of the process. But one of the things that, I work a lot with beauty as a concept. And that quote in there is, Dostoevsky, beauty will save the world, which I believe, especially when you look at beauty in terms of almost standing for the divine. An ability to recognize beauty and experience beauty is, I think, salvational. But when I was putting together the show, my husband and I watched a show on PBS called The Tallest Dwarf. And it was a documentary about little people. And they call themselves that, so I can use that term, I think, without apology. And it was like workshops where they were dancing and expressing. And I just felt like, wow, my concept of beauty is so shallow. And, what's out there. And then I also saw a video of the costumes in the new Met Gala show, which is different from the people and their outfits. It's the whole Met show that is a costume exhibit. And they used a model, they did scans and mannequins from little people, from people in wheelchairs, from older people, and I was just like, okay. And I think I've worked with this concept of beauty, which is maybe, fairly available, kind of physically really perfect bodies, been my own journey for my own healing from my life as a dancer and bulimic and injured and all the stuff that I went through. But I feel like what's next for me is to challenge my own concept of beauty and find beauty in places where I might not have readily known it to be available. The thing I love the most about my work is the body that's not inside the dress, because really all of these dresses are kind of about the body that's not there. The idea that the fabric expresses the body that's not there is, I think, part of what I love about it is when I'm dealing with an actual figure like this, if I'm going to make fingers and toes in my own kind of rule making as an artist, I have to also make a face. But the minute you start making faces, or the minute you start portraying something that looks like skin, you kind of get in this realm of identity. And I just don't know what to do with that. I've tried and I've tried. In the Met, what they're doing for their faces is they're having these mirrored kind of flat faces that are just like these mirrored things. But that didn't really go with fingers and toes to me so much. So but when I just do the bodies, I love the anonymity. So that word is like, it's how it doesn't really talk about an individual, but it more talks about like an idea. Does that make sense to you? It's like, it could be anyone inside that dress. You wouldn't necessarily know what they look like, but they feel like a body. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.